It was just after dawn when I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel, followed by the sudden flash of red and blue lights painting my farmhouse in an eerily familiar glow. I stepped onto my wraparound porch, coffee mug in hand, still, wearing my faded army PT shorts and an old t-shirt, watching as two police cruisers parked at the edge of my private road. There stood Brenda, clipboard clutched to her chest like a medieval shield, wildly gesturing at the freshly laid gravel path that wound through my 5-acre property. "He's blocking public access," she shrieked, jabbing her manicured finger toward the modest wooden gate I'd installed last weekend. "That road is community property, and he's militarized it. I demand you arrest him immediately." The younger officer glanced at my simple farm gate with its small private property sign, then back at me with an expression that silently communicated both apology and exhaustion. I took a slow sip of my coffee and called out, "Morning, officers! Have I somehow managed to break the law by putting gravel on my own driveway?" Just 3 months earlier, life had been blissfully quiet. After 15 years of military service and 2 deployments, I'd used my savings to purchase this small farm on the outskirts of Meadow Creek Estates. The property wasn't fancy. A modest 2-bedroom farmhouse that needed work, a weathered barn that leaned slightly to the left, and 5 acres of land that had once been productive, but now grew mostly wild grasses and the occasional stubborn pumpkin vine. What had attracted me wasn't the house itself, but the promise of peace. The property sat at the end of a winding dirt road that branched off from the main subdivision street. My nearest neighbor was a 1/4 mile away, the distant rooftops barely visible through the trees. It was perfect, a place to decompress, to wake up without the sound of orders being shouted, to sleep without jumping at every noise. The previous owner had been an elderly man who rarely maintained the property, and the dirt access road had deteriorated over years of neglect. During my first month, after a particularly heavy rainstorm, the path became so muddy that my truck got stuck halfway between the main road and my house. That's when I decided to properly grade and gravel the 800-foot stretch of private road that led exclusively to my property. I checked the property maps, consulted with the county clerk, and even had a surveyor verify the boundaries. The road was entirely on my land, and I had the legal right to maintain it however I saw fit. I spent 2 weekends working from sunrise to sunset, renting equipment to level the path, laying drainage ditches, and spreading gravel. I'd even planted wildflowers along the edges to prevent erosion. The work was therapeutic, and I took pride in transforming the muddy ruts into a proper country lane. The trouble began the day after I installed a simple wooden gate at the entrance to my property. Nothing fancy, just a practical farm gate with a small sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing." That's when Brenda entered my life like a tornado hitting a trailer park. Brenda Harrington was the self-appointed enforcer of the Meadow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. She lived in the largest house in the subdivision, a sprawling 2-story colonial with white columns and precisely trimmed hedges that formed perfect right angles. Her SUV bore a custom license plate that read MC HOA, and she carried her clipboard everywhere like it was an extension of her arm. The day after my gate went up, I found a laminated notice stuck to it. Unapproved modification to Community Access Road. Remove within 24 hours or face maximum penalties. The text was bold, red, and featured the HOA logo that Brenda had designed herself, an unnecessarily intricate crest featuring a picket fence and what appeared to be a golden rule book. I was confused. My property wasn't even part of the Meadow Creek HOA. I'd specifically checked before purchasing to ensure I wouldn't have to deal with community regulations. The farm had been grandfathered in decades before the subdivision was built, and while the developers had tried to purchase it multiple times to expand their cookie-cutter paradise, the previous owner had stubbornly refused. I removed the notice and went about my day, assuming it was a simple misunderstanding. That assumption proved to be my first mistake. The next morning, as I was drinking coffee on my porch and watching the sunrise, one of the simple pleasures I'd dreamed about during my time overseas, a white SUV with gold trim pulled up to my gate. Out stepped Brenda, dressed in a crisp pantsuit despite the early hour, her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to function as a natural facelift. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice somehow both syrupy, sweet, and knife-sharp. "I notice you failed to comply with the HOA directive regarding this illegal barricade." I walked down to meet her, keeping my voice calm. "Good morning. I think there's been a misunderstanding. This property isn't part of the Meadow Creek HOA." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Actually, all roads connecting to Meadow Creek Drive fall under HOA jurisdiction for emergency access purposes. It's in Section 7.3 of the Covenant. Ma'am, I've reviewed my property deed and boundaries. This is a private road on private property. It doesn't connect to anything except my farm." She tapped her clipboard impatiently. "Perhaps you don't understand how things work here. This road has been used by community members for years as a walking path and emergency turnaround." "Used without permission," I clarified, "and I've had to pull out 3 vehicles this month alone that got stuck in the mud. That's why I improved the road and added the gate." Her plastic smile finally dropped. "We'll see about that. The board meets on Thursday." She turned and marched back to her SUV, already dialing someone on her phone. I stood by my gate, watching her drive away and feeling the familiar tension creeping into my shoulders. I'd left the military to escape conflict, not to find myself in a new type of warfare, but something told me that Brenda wasn't going to back down easily, and neither would I. This was my land, my road, and after fighting for my country, I wasn't about to surrender my little piece of it to someone with a clipboard and an inflated sense of authority. 48 hours after discovering the storage unit, another development. A security camera at a highway rest stop captured footage of Wilson being forced into a black SUV by 2 men in tactical gear. The vehicle's license plate was registered to a shell company that, after several layers of corporate veils were penetrated, connected back to Centurion Group. "They're tying up loose ends," Ryan told his team during an emergency briefing, "which means they know we're getting close." The coordinated search for Wilson expanded across 3 states, involving multiple agencies and a dedicated forensic team monitoring all communications associated with Centurion Group. Meanwhile, Ryan focused on the Medicare billing records Richards had mentioned, discovering a complex scheme where the stolen medications were being billed to both the VA and Medicare, effectively doubling the government payout, while veterans received dangerous counterfeits. The scheme's sophistication indicated professional financial expertise beyond what security contractors would typically possess. Following the money trail revealed an offshore consulting firm that provided services exclusively to one client, a political action committee chaired by Senator Chambers. The international hunt for Derek Sullivan intensified as Ryan coordinated with military contacts in countries where the former medic might have sought refuge. Sullivan's combat experience and medical training made him exceptionally resourceful, capable of staying off the grid while gathering evidence against those who had destroyed his career. ATF intelligence analysts tracked financial transactions through a series of anonymous cryptocurrency transfers that suggested Sullivan was moving methodically through Southeast Asia, always one step ahead of those pursuing him. "He's not running scared," Ryan explained to Dr. Chen as they reviewed Sullivan's movement patterns on a digital map. "This is calculated, planned. He's gathering something." Reports from contacts in Thailand confirmed Sullivan had stayed briefly at a small medical clinic near Chiang Mai, treating local patients while using a false identity before vanishing again when men claiming to be Interpol agents began asking questions in nearby villages. His training as a combat medic allowed him to support himself while maintaining a low profile in regions where medical care was scarce and few questions were asked about credentials. Financial crime specialists uncovered a complex network of transactions, linking offshore accounts that had been activated in sequence as Sullivan moved, transferring small amounts through digital currencies and remittance services that were difficult to track. The pattern suggested not panicked flight, but a methodical operation to document a criminal network's global reach. When facial recognition software identified Sullivan at a medical supply warehouse in Malaysia, he wasn't alone. Security footage showed him examining pharmaceutical packaging with a local doctor, who was later identified as a former US Army physician who had resigned his commission after filing complaints about medical supply irregularities at a military hospital in Germany. The connection suggested Sullivan was assembling allies who shared his concerns about the counterfeit medication operation. Further investigation revealed that Sullivan had been systematically connecting with former military medical personnel across Asia, each of whom had attempted to report pharmaceutical discrepancies through proper channels, only to face career-ending consequences. Together, they were building a case that spanned multiple countries and military installations. "We're not dealing with a rogue medic," Ryan told Eliza as they reviewed the expanding evidence board. "Sullivan is assembling a coalition of whistleblowers who were individually silenced but collectively hold pieces of a global operation." Ryan's small, trusted team worked from a secured conference room at the field office, walls now covered with photographs, timelines, and string connecting seemingly disparate elements of the case. "We're following a pattern," Ryan explained to the assembled agents, tracing Sullivan's movements on a large map. Each location connects to a military installation or VA facility where pharmaceutical supplies were compromised. Sullivan isn't evading capture, he's documenting a supply chain. As the team assembled the pieces, a disturbing picture emerged. Legitimate pharmaceuticals were being diverted from military and VA facilities, replaced with counterfeits manufactured in unregulated factories, with the profits funding various political operations through a labyrinth of shell companies and dark money organizations. The situation reached its breaking point on a rainy Saturday morning. I was in my barn, restoring an old tractor I'd bought at auction, when my phone buzzed with a security alert. Checking the camera feed, I saw not just Brenda this time, but 3 men in reflective vests examining my gate, One carried bolt cutters, another had what looked like official paperwork. I immediately saved the video, pulled on my rain jacket, and headed down to confront them. By the time I reached the gate, one man was already positioning the bolt cutters around my chain. "Excuse me," I called out firmly. "You're trespassing on private property." The men turned, startled. Brenda stepped forward, rainwater dripping from her expensive raincoat. "Mr. Mitchell," she announced with manufactured authority, "these gentlemen are from county services. We've obtained an access order due to your illegal blockage of a community pathway." I addressed the men directly. "May I see this order?" The oldest of the group, a gray-haired man with an uncomfortable expression, handed me a document. It took only seconds to recognize it as completely fabricated. The letterhead was real, but the signature was clearly forged, and it referenced county codes that didn't exist. "This document is fake," I stated calmly. "I suggest you call your actual supervisor." Before proceeding, the men exchanged glances. One pulled out his phone and stepped away to make a call. "This is ridiculous," Brenda snapped. "The community has rights to this road. It's been used for decades." "Without permission," I countered. "And now you're attempting to damage my property with fraudulent paperwork. The sheriff has already been notified about previous vandalism, and my cameras have recorded everything happening here." The man who'd made the call returned, his face grim. "Ma'am, there's no work order for this address. The office has no record of any access enforcement today." Brenda's face flushed. "There must be some mistake. I filed the paperwork myself after the board approved emergency measures. I'm not cutting anything without proper authorization," the man with the bolt cutters declared, backing away. "This looks like a civil matter." As the county workers departed, Brenda turned on me with undisguised fury. "You won't get away with this. That road belongs to the community. The property lines and deeds say otherwise," I replied steadily, "and you're still trespassing." "We'll see about that," she hissed, storming back to her SUV. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called. "You've made an enemy," he informed me. "Brenda Harrington has filed a civil suit against you, claiming there's a prescriptive easement on your road due to historical public use. She's also filed complaints with 3 different county departments." "Can she win?" I asked. "Unlikely. Prescriptive easements are difficult to prove, especially against a recent purchaser who's actively objecting to trespassers. But she's creating a legal headache for you." That was an understatement. Over the next 2 weeks, I had to deal with inspectors from the building department checking my barn's structural integrity, environmental officials investigating a false claim about illegal dumping, and animal control responding to reports of aggressive dogs, despite the fact that I didn't own any pets. Each visit ended the same way, officials apologizing for the misunderstanding and leaving with confirmation that no violations existed. Each false report traced back to Brenda or an anonymous concerned citizen with her precise manner of writing. The campaign extended beyond official channels. My mailbox was stuffed with HOA violation notices daily. Signs appeared at the subdivision, entrance warning about dangerous conditions on my property. Neighbors who had previously waved when passing now avoided eye contact. During a trip to the local hardware store, I overheard 2 men discussing that stubborn veteran who's blocking access to Veterans Park. When I introduced myself, their embarrassment was palpable as I explained the reality of the situation. Was cataloging this pattern of harassment when my security camera captured something truly disturbing. At 2:14 a.m., my motion alerts triggered. The footage showed Brenda and a man I recognized as another HOA board member approaching my gate with flashlights. They examined the lock, then proceeded to pour something along the gravel road just inside my property. I immediately went to investigate, finding a trail of what appeared to be motor oil deliberately poured across my newly graveled driveway. The contamination extended about 30 feet, with clear evidence they had brought multiple containers. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was environmental vandalism that would cost thousands to remediate. I called the sheriff's office. Immediately, 2 deputies arrived within the hour, surveyed the damage, reviewed the crystal-clear footage of Brenda and her accomplice in the act, and took official statements. The larger deputy shook his head as he watched the video for the 3rd time. "Pretty clear-cut case of criminal mischief and trespassing," he noted. "Probably environmental charges too, given the oil. We'll need to bring them in for questioning." As the deputies left to obtain warrants, I began calculating the cleanup costs. The contaminated gravel would need to be removed, the soil tested, and potentially remediated if the oil had penetrated deeply, all because Brenda couldn't accept that my private property was, in fact, private. The following morning, I received a strange email from one of the HOA board members, a quiet man named Thomas, who had always seemed uncomfortable with Brenda's tactics. The message was brief. "Check the HOA financial records, previous lawsuits, Veterans Park funding, not what it seems." Intrigued, I did some digging. Public records revealed that the Veterans Park had been hastily established 3 years ago using HOA emergency funds without proper community voting. More interesting was the timing. Immediately after a wealthy developer had expressed interest in building luxury homes on adjacent land. The park's location effectively blocked that development while significantly increasing property values for certain board members, including Brenda. Even more damning, I discovered that my property had been targeted for annexation in the HOA's 5-year plan. They had attempted to purchase it from the previous owner multiple times, but had been rejected. My private road wasn't just a walking path, it was their desired access point for expanding the subdivision. Armed with this information and the video evidence of Brenda's midnight vandalism, I now understood the full picture. This wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president enforcing arbitrary rules. This was a calculated campaign to devalue my property, force me out, and execute their development plans. As I compiled all this evidence into a comprehensive file, my security system alerted me again. Sheriff's deputies were at Brenda's house, leading her and her accomplice to patrol cars in handcuffs, while neighbors watched from their perfectly manicured lawns. The tables had finally turned. Now it was time to take the offensive. The day after Brenda's arrest, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors I'd never spoken to called to apologize for believing her claims. Local news wanted statements about the HOA president arrested for vandalism story that was spreading through the county. Even the remaining board members reached out, distancing themselves from Brenda's unauthorized actions and assuring me they had never officially endorsed her campaign against my property. I declined most interviews, but did provide a simple statement. I purchased this farm for peace and quiet after serving my country. All I've ever wanted was to enjoy my private property rights without interference. The charges against Brenda and her accomplice, HOA Vice President Gerald Thompson, were substantial. Criminal trespassing, vandalism, environmental damage, filing false reports, and attempted fraud for the forged county documents. The sheriff's department took the case seriously, particularly after discovering this wasn't Brenda's first property dispute. 2 previous homeowners had moved away after similar harassment campaigns, though none had documented their experiences as thoroughly as I had. The environmental cleanup cost nearly $7,000. My insurance covered part of it, but the process was disruptive and time-consuming. Crews in hazmat suits dug up sections of my driveway, testing soil samples and removing contaminated gravel. Every vehicle that entered left muddy tracks through my yard, undoing months of landscaping work. During the cleanup, I received an unexpected visitor. Thomas, the board member who had tipped me off about the financial records, arrived carrying a thick folder. "I should have spoken up sooner," he admitted, handing me the documents. Brenda controlled the board through intimidation and procedural manipulation. Most of us just wanted to avoid becoming her next target. The folder contained meeting minutes, financial records, and private emails revealing the full extent of Brenda's schemes. The Veterans Park had indeed been created specifically to block development that would have reduced the property values of board members' homes. My farm had been targeted because its location was ideal for a planned expansion that would have substantially benefited certain board members financially. Most shocking was evidence that Brenda had used HOA funds, nearly $15,000, to hire a private investigator to find leverage against me. The PI had compiled a dossier on my military service, financial situation, and personal history, looking for vulnerabilities. His report, marked disappointing, noted that I had no exploitable weaknesses beyond a stubborn adherence to principle and possible PTSD from combat service that might make me reactive to confrontation. "She was trying to provoke you," Thomas explained. "She thought if she could get you to lose your temper publicly, she could paint you as unstable and dangerous." I nodded, understanding now why she had escalated from bureaucratic harassment to personal confrontation. She'd been trying to trigger a response that would discredit me. My military training in maintaining composure under pressure had served me better than I realized. With Thomas's documentation and my own evidence, my lawyer filed a civil suit against Brenda personally and the HOA as an organization for harassment, defamation, and conspiracy. The remaining board members, desperate to avoid further scandal, accepted a settlement that covered all my damages, legal fees, and included a binding agreement acknowledging that my property was not subject to HOA jurisdiction in any form. More importantly, the settlement required the HOA to establish clear property boundary education for all residents and board members, and to create a transparent approval process for any rule enforcement actions. The days of clipboard vigilantes were over. Brenda and Gerald both accepted plea deals to avoid jail time, receiving probation, community service, and substantial fines. Part of their sentence included environmental remediation work, not on my property, but at actual public parks throughout the county. The judge, a Vietnam veteran himself, seemed to take particular satisfaction in ordering Brenda to perform 200 hours of landscape maintenance at the county's Veterans Memorial. As for the Veterans Park controversy, an investigation by county officials revealed that proper permits had never been filed for its establishment. The land reverted to its original zoning, and the HOA was required to hold a legitimate community vote on its future use. 3 months after the arrest, Life had settled into a new rhythm. My gravel road was restored better than before, with proper drainage ditches and native wildflowers blooming along the edges. The gate remained, now equipped with a more sophisticated security system, though I rarely needed to lock it anymore. The community had learned to respect boundaries, both literal and figurative. One sunny morning, as I was replacing some damaged fence posts, a convoy of cars drove up to my gate. I tensed momentarily until I recognized Thomas, leading a group of about a dozen residents. They parked outside the gate and approached on foot, carrying what appeared to be picnic baskets and tools. "Hope you don't mind the company," Thomas called out. We wanted to properly introduce ourselves as neighbors, not adversaries. The group included families with children, elderly couples, and even a few veterans who had lived in the subdivision for years, but had avoided confrontation with Brenda's regime. They had come with a proposition, a genuine community relationship, based on mutual respect rather than coercion. "We took a vote," explained an elderly woman who introduced herself as Martha. "The real Veterans Park is going to be built properly, with county approval, on land the community actually owns. We'd like your input on the design, if you're willing." That afternoon turned into an impromptu neighborhood gathering on my front lawn. Children played tag between hay bales, adults shared stories over homemade lemonade, and for the first time since moving in, I felt like part of a community rather than its enemy. As the sun began to set, most of the visitors packed up to leave. Thomas stayed behind, helping me put away folding chairs. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "Brenda actually did bring the community together, just not in the way she intended." I laughed. "I suppose we should thank her for that, at least." "The new board is different," he assured me. "Monthly meetings, now open forum, term limits, no more dictatorships." As Thomas drove away, I stood at my gate, still mine, still private, but no longer a barrier so much as a boundary. A clear line that, once respected, allowed for genuine neighborly relationships to form across it. The next morning, I found a small package in my mailbox. Inside was a handcrafted wooden sign to replace my utilitarian private property marker. It read simply, "Mitchell Farm, established 2023. Attached was a note, "Boundaries make better neighbors. Welcome to the community." I smiled as I mounted the sign on my gatepost. The road ahead looked much smoother than the one behind me. If you enjoyed this story about standing up for property rights against an overzealous HOA, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more outrageous true stories. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss my next video about neighborhood conflicts and how ordinary people triumph against unreasonable demands. Drop a comment below sharing your own HOA horror stories. I read every comment and might feature your story in an upcoming video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.